So in the last 6 months, I have lost 20 pounds of fat, and I'll explain how I know it's just been fat, on the same calories, and I want to explain why here. Now, I've been using Retatrutide for the last 3 of those 6 months. And as you saw with the title of this video, Retatrutide doubled my fat loss. So let's talk about the first 90 days. So I'm a nutrition consultant by trade. That's what I do for work. That's what I do for a living. And I have a lot of clients. And I created some challenges for my clients. And during these challenges, some people want to lose weight, some people want to gain some muscle, some people just want to get fitter, feel more mobile, get active, have a community, those sorts of things, right? So lots of different goals in here. My goal during the challenge was to take myself, I was probably 10, 11, 12, now probably 12, 13% body fat, somewhere in there, and to take myself to a single digit body fat percentage and under 200 pounds. I'm 40 years old. I don't necessarily want to get any air quote bigger. I love being nimble. I love feeling athletic. And I'm 5'11", so I'm not super tall, so I'm pretty heavy. I have a decent amount of muscle for someone my height, my size. And I feel best under 200 pounds. I had allowed myself to get a bit heavier, trying to put on a bit more muscle, and my goal changed. And that's okay, right? We can always change our goals, whether your goal is fat loss, muscle gain, again, those things, right? To feel more mobile, feel more athletic, whatever that is. And so for the first 3 months, I just did it with nutrition and activity. I did a 500 calorie per day deficit, and what I assumed was a 500 calories in extra activity per day deficit, if you want to call that, but just adding 500 calories of extra activity through 10,000 steps and or 300 calories on a Stairmaster, Airdyne, rowing machine, those sorts of things, plus added steps on top of that. So during that time, I went from 214.9 pounds to 206.1 pounds. That is an 8.8 pound loss during that first 90 days. Again, same calories. I kept the calories exactly the same. I started this as an experiment for myself because what I wanted to do was to see if the math on the added activity. And what I found was that doing what I assumed was 500 calories and extra activity was actually not over those 90 days. And so I had a lot of clients coming to me in the last few years that have either been on semaglutide, so we're talking about drugs like Wegovy or drugs like Ozempic, or they were thinking about going that route. I had a couple of clients come to me on a drug called Retatrutide, which we'll go over how these drugs work in a minute. And I started getting my gears turning, because I saw a lot of people using these drugs and not using them, in my opinion, properly. And when I say not using them properly, they weren't changing their nutrition, they weren't changing their lifestyle. So they were depending on the drug, and again, we'll talk about how these drugs work. They were depending on the drug to lose the weight, and then if they wanted to either come off of the drug or their weight loss stalled out, they didn't have any more tools for either keeping the weight off, which is most important, and B, furthering their progress. And so people kind of get to this stalemate. They go to the doctor and they're like, they're stalled out on weight loss. What do I do? The doctor increases the drugs. Now we have side effects. Now we start talking about all these negative things. And these drugs, which in my opinion are miracle drugs, get a really bad name. So fast forward a little bit to this second part of 90 days. Leading up to this, I was having some conversations, both with people that are very close to me and other coaches in this particular space. I used to coach a lot of bodybuilders. And I had people bringing a drug called Retatrutide to me, to the forefront of my information or forefront of my thoughts, right? So I started looking into this drug and I'm like, this is very interesting. I know how semaglutide works, which is a GLP-1 agonist. I know how tirzepatide works, which is a GLP-1 plus GIP agonist. Again, I'm gonna explain these in very simple terms in just a minute. And then Retatrutide is those first two plus a glucagon receptor agonist, and I know how that works. And so in my brain, I'm like, man, this seems like a really advantageous thing for a lot of reasons. Why don't I run an experiment on myself? And so with the experiment, what I did, and I'll explain why I cut the activity down, but what I did was I kept my calories exactly the same. I did all the studying on Retatrutide, and I built my own titration schedule, which is actually starting at 1/4 of the recommended dose. You can always add more. It doesn't matter what the drug is or the compound is or whatever you're using for your own experiments or whatever. You can always add more. I find that specifically with weight loss or muscle building, it's very difficult for people to add less, right? Like even if we look at something like coffee. Let's say you're someone who drinks 3 cups of coffee a day. If I say you can only have 1 cup, even something as simple as that is very difficult to decrease instantaneously. And so I would much rather start on the low side of things and be able to work myself up, not only because I want to see how I respond to this compound, if I get any negative side effects, etc. I want to see how low of a dose I can use and get the results that I desire, because why would I want to use more of a drug, risk side effects? It's more expensive that way, and you're putting more of something foreign in your body that you don't necessarily need if you're getting the results on a lower dose. So I'll get off my soapbox in that regard. So I start using Retatrutide. I keep my calories the same. I cut my activity in half. The reason I cut my activity in half is because I was doing a lot of activity for a lot of months in a row, and I just wanted to chill a little bit. I didn't want to have to worry about walking 10,000 steps, getting 300 calories on the Stairmaster every single day, those sorts of things. I was adding a lot of activity to my schedule every single day, and I wanted to focus a bit more on business, a bit more on making content, those sorts of things. So that's what I did. Much to my surprise, the very first thing that I noticed with Retatrutide, which is actually a byproduct or side effect, whichever you want to call, of semaglutide or the GLP-1 portion of these compounds. So semaglutide, tirzepatide, and Retatrutide are all we'll call them GLP-1 plus compounds. So they all three have the GLP-1 in them. Tirzepatide has the GLP-1 and GIP, and then Retatrutide has GLP-1, GIP, and glucagon agonist all in them. So immediately what I noticed by introducing this compound was that I had much less food noise and much less hunger. For someone like me, that's really good. I do not have good genetics when it comes to muscle building, fat loss, any of these things. For as large as I am or as big as I am, I have to eat a really low calorie content. I'll be transparent with you guys. I was at 1,780 calories a day. And like I said, to be real, towards the end of those first 3 months, I was starting to get really low energy. It was very difficult. Like, I have the tools and the discipline created to get up and go to the gym and get my activity in every day, but it started to be something I didn't look forward to. As soon as I put Retatrutide in the mix, my motivation went through the roof. My energy went through the roof. My hunger level went down. So on the first 3 weeks, it was actually pretty difficult for me to get all of my protein specifically, because I started getting to this satiety point. So you guys probably heard people say oh, I got the meat sweats, that sort of thing. That is your body's natural response to saying, hey, you don't need to eat any more of whatever that particular thing is. It's just satiety. And a lot of us don't feel this natural satiety point because we're eating processed foods that are very high calorie but very dense, right? So low volume, high calorie foods. But and I eat pretty clean, when you're eating single ingredient whole foods, chicken breast, ground beef, these sorts of things, or just beef in general, whatever, fish, whatever you're eating, you can get to a satiety point much quicker. And you can do the same thing with carbohydrates, potatoes, rice. Not saying any of those are bad. Those are just much easier to eat in a large volume because they taste good and the satiety point doesn't get there. I digress. So I start losing weight much more rapidly than I was previously. And again, this is blowing my mind because regardless of what you've heard previously, fat loss is a math equation. Whatever energy your body currently demands or whatever you expend total on a daily basis, so long as you exert more energy than that, either with activity, right? Or you ingest less than that, you're going to lose mass total. Obviously, we want to lose body fat, and I'll talk about that in a second. We want to lose body fat, but you're going to lose mass no matter what. 100% of the time, if a human's body burns more energy than that human consumes, you will lose mass. Your macro balance and what you're doing for that energy depends or will make up the composition. So let me give you an example here. If let's say you eat 1,000 calories a day and you're just eating 1,000 calories of gummy bears, and you decide that you're gonna go run a marathon every day, right? You're gonna lose a lot of weight really, really fast, but a lot of that weight is going to be lean mass. You're going to lose a lot of muscle. So what we want to do instead is we want to resistance train of some sort. And resistance training can be your own body. If people hear resistance training or lift weights or whatever, and they instantly think I gotta go be a meathead in the gym. You absolutely do not. Resistance training for some of you, especially if you're extremely sedentary, can be going to yoga. It can be getting on YouTube and typing in at-home workout, body weight, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. It doesn't need to be anything crazy, but we need to add some resistance. And for some of you, or a lot of you, you've heard of what a burpee is, right? So think about that. You say burpee out loud, and anyone who's ever done one before goes, I hate burpees. You know, it's one of those movements. But a burpee is extremely effective for multiple reasons. Not only are you exerting a lot of energy, it's really low impact. You're not going to get injured. And it's very eye-opening to the fact that you can take your own body, do the simplest thing of putting it on the ground and standing back up again and again and again, and literally thrash yourself like in a 10-minute window. So anyway, off the burpee soapbox there. Let me explain how these drugs work and why I was able to lose double the amount of fat, 20 pounds of fat in the last 6 months consuming the same calories. Okay, so the GLP-1 portion of semaglutide, tirzepatide, and retatrutide is going to tell your pancreas to release more insulin. Insulin is a nutrient shuttling hormone. It is, for some of you, you're type 2 diabetic, you're in an insulin resistant state, the tissues don't accept that insulin very well, and or your pancreas is not producing much insulin. It could be one of a few of those things. I'm not your doctor, I don't know, you'd have to ask there, right? But I do know how this particular piece works here. The GLP-1 tells your pancreas, release more insulin. That insulin shuttles nutrients out into tissues more effectively. Also, it slows the digestion and or stomach emptying of the food you consume, as well as making you feel more full. So these three things compounded on top of one another, again, the GLP-1 being something that is naturally occurring in us anyway, we're just putting more of it in our body, and our body is having these positive responses to it. So those three pathways, called a cascade if you mix things together, are positives, all for weight loss, right? You're getting more insulin. So if you're insulin resistant and or not producing a lot of insulin, you're doing more of that. The tissues are getting more nutrients rather than those nutrients being shuttled into fat storage with insulin. And also you're feeling fuller, so you're consuming less calories for the most part overall. Again, if you're not tracking your calories and you're someone who's telling yourself like, I can't lose weight or I struggle with my weight management or whatever, you don't. You're missing the biggest piece of understanding weight loss, which is knowing how many calories are coming in the first place. And a lot of you are going to think like, that's crazy, I have to weigh my food and blah, blah, blah. Yes, absolutely. If your employer just wanted you to show up at work and work however many hours and they were going to just give you a random number, right? You'd be like, what the heck? Like, we need to track the hours worked so we know how much we get paid, right? It's the exact same thing with your body. You need to know what you're putting into your body so you can understand why your body is doing or not doing what it's doing. So track your food if you're not tracking your food. MyFitnessPal is probably the easiest, most well-known app to use. So use it. Again, if you're saying, I can't lose weight, I can't lose fat, I keep gaining weight, and you don't know how many calories you're consuming, that's why. You don't have a fat loss problem. You have a portion control and personal accountability, not putting food in your mouth problem, all right? Second part of this drug, when we're talking about tirzepatide, moving on here. We're talking about tirzepatide. Now, tirzepatide is the GLP-1 plus the GIP. And a GIP, I'm gonna have to read this right here, is a glucose-dependent insulin nootropic polypeptide. What does all that nonsense mean? It boosts insulin. It improves how the muscles in the fat cells utilize nutrients / calories. This is, in my opinion, where for me at least, the biggest thing is happening. And for those of you who are watching up to this point and have said things like I said, I don't have good genetics. Let me explain why I believe that this GIP, this insulin nootropic polypeptide, is the biggest piece here for people like you and I. If you have bad genes, right, like I do, for my size and my activity level, I should probably be able to consume about 1,000 calories more per day, but I cannot. And why is that? Likely because my body is not efficiently utilizing these nutrients that I'm consuming. So what's the difference between someone who has really good genes and someone who has shitty genes? So let's say it's someone just like me. I have a twin brother, and my twin brother can eat 1,000 calories more per day, and we look exactly the same. We're the same body fat percentage, we work out together, we do cardio together, we our hobbies are exactly the same, exact same person, but this person gets to eat 1,000 calories more. What's going on there? From a genetic standpoint, that individual is likely utilizing the calories that they consume, so the energy that they intake, right, from food, more efficiently. This GIP portion, in my opinion, all of them are important. But the GIP, in my opinion, is the miracle for individuals like you and I. If you're someone who you're like, I've eaten 800 calories a day for a month and I can't lose any weight, this shit will change your life. This is where I have been stuck. I'm 40 years old. I was an obese child and I've been battling weight my entire life. Now, mind you, like I said, I've created the routines and the habits in my lifestyle, as well as the discipline to keep my health in check, most importantly overall, but also my body composition in check for years now. I've had abs since I was like 33 years old. It's funny, I had a friend of mine tell me one time, I used to own gyms, CrossFit gyms, and we were working out on a weekend, and a friend of mine looked over to me and said, she's a really good friend of mine, so I didn't take this negatively. You need friends like this, by the way. She looks at me and says, you're looking a little bit tubby. And for whatever reason, right? I currently owned a gym. I was competing in CrossFit. I was a really good, air quote, athlete. And for whatever reason, that flipped a switch in my head. And I told myself, from this point forward, as long as I can, I will never allow my body fat to get high enough to where I do not have visible abs all year. And I'm not saying that visible abs are the overall marker of health, right? Yes, there's some vanity there. I want to look a certain way. But in my opinion, if you can keep your body fat percentage, this is mostly for the males. Females, that's a little bit different story. We're gonna have a little bit higher body fat percentage kind of all the time, just naturally. And so that's another conversation. If you wanna have that conversation, let me know. I'll make a separate video on that. But the males, if you can keep your body fat percentage under control to a point where you have abs 365 days out of the year, even if they're a little cloudy, but even if they're just visible, what's going to happen is you're going to keep your insulin resistance in check. You're going to keep your joints healthy. You're going to keep probably habits healthy, right? Because you can't be drinking your face off and eating fast food and eating garbage all the time and still have visible abs. Can you do some of that? Absolutely. You love pizza and beer? Yes, you can have it. This goes back to what we were talking about a minute ago. You need to know your average calories, whether it's over the week, over the month, whatever, your average calories that are being ingested, so you know why your body's doing what it's doing. I eat treat meals all the time. I normally try to do them once a week. Sometimes it's a bit more. Sometimes I know that I need to be a bit more disciplined over a long period of time. For these last 3 months, I've been pretty disciplined. I've done a little bit of traveling here and there, and so had some meals out here and there. But apart from those, when I decide, and it's a decision, it's not like I'm anti fast food or restaurant food or any of that type of stuff. I'm a regular person, just like most of the people who are going to watch this. I'm not a competitive bodybuilder or pro athlete or anything like that. And mind you, pro athletes are eating fast food and doing, having ice cream and stuff too. So that is what it is, right? Bodybuilders are the only people who are super, super stringent on their diet. And that's mostly when they're on prep. If you guys seen some bodybuilders, surrounded by bodybuilders for a long time, outside of contest prep, a lot of them eat like toddlers, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? We got to have some flexibility here. And so I say all this to say, this portion of this drug, this tirzepatide, right, is likely what is the magic pill, is the miracle, is the whatever you want to call it for individuals who are like myself. Someone who puts in the work, who has the nutrition dial, who does all of this stuff, but no matter what, cannot increase my calorie intake without simultaneously gaining more fat than I want to. So as soon as I introduce, now Retatrutide, again, if you remember, I said it's a 3-part. So GIP, GLP-1, and glucagon agonist, it's a 3-part. So this is like me introducing tirzepatide plus something else to it, right? So let's get to this last part here. The glucagon agonist tells the liver to release stored sugar and helps burn fat for energy. Now imagine this, you just introduced the miracle to your shitty metabolism, right? Of being able to utilize energy at a higher clip, to be able to take the 1,000 calories that you consume, and instead of storing 500 of them as fat and only having 500 available as energy, and now you're tired and you feel like shit and you're not losing fat, you're burning 980 calories of that as energy, right? So my energy goes through the roof. And my mind, up to this point, is blown away. I'm talking about it on my Instagram. If you're not following me on Instagram, do that. It's at the.coach.phil. It'll probably be right here. Go follow me, please. I'm blown away up to this point because I've dieted for bodybuilding shows before. I've dieted for CrossFit competitions before. I've dieted for powerlifting before. And I always have to eat such low calories and have such shitty energy and just don't feel good in general that I thought I was doomed. I thought I was doomed for life. I thought this is just what it is. I'm gonna have to suffer through it. I've suffered through lots of other things before. I'll make it work, you know? And that's great. You know, you can David Goggins it and have the mentality and all that shit. But you know what's even better? Having a compound available to you, to me, that allows me to feel amazing on the same amount of calories and get shredded. This is the magic potion, you know? And I know I'm going above and beyond here, but if you're someone, I know a lot of you don't know me personally, but anyone who knows me personally knows that I'm very skeptical of any supplement, of anything. There, you know, we're talking about peptides, but peptides been around for a long time. I've been in fitness for a long time. So we've been talking about peptides for 10, 15, 20 years, and there have not been any peptides available until the last few years. You know, semaglutide's been around for a long time. Tirzepatide's been around for less long, but these drugs have been around for a bit. They're just got out of their clinical trials. Well, tirzepatide did, but semaglutide's been on the market for a lot longer. But it's only been used, it's only been marketed to two communities, right? You have the diabetic community and you have the obesity community. And what I'm saying here is that these compounds not only are extremely powerful for those two communities. So yes, they will assist both of those. But if you're someone like me who has a shitty metabolism and you've been working so hard in the gym and you do all the right things and you know, get your sleep in, you meal prep, you do all the things right and you still aren't getting the results that you want, this will change your life. I know for me, this will likely be something like I monitor glucose levels. I just monitored my glucose levels the other day. They're normally not low, but they're on the low side of normal as it is. They were even lower because with Retatrutide, the glucagon agonist has the potential to elevate blood sugar a little bit, particularly post-feeding. And so I wanted to make sure that that wasn't a thing. Much to my astonishment, again, even lower than it normally is. So I think, and there's some other markers that are going on here. I kind of struggle with my skin. If I have any level of inflammation in my body, my skin is the first place that goes. I can see with foods that I eat. There's certain foods that I completely avoid. I don't eat a lot of grain-based or any grain-based foods really unless I'm having a treat meal for that particular reason. And it's not because I'm gluten intolerant. It's because that's a whole other video. But it's likely has to do with the way we eat here in America. If you're watching this in another country, it probably won't make sense. But yeah, there's a lot of things with farming here in America that are not so great, particularly when it comes to grain-based stuff, and so I avoid that altogether. Obviously, sugar, we know, is not good for us, so I try to avoid all added sugars as much as possible, and doing those keeps my skin much clearer. You know, if you're someone who has skin issues on the knees, on the elbows, those sorts of things, you have acne, it doesn't matter where the acne is in your body, that is your body giving you feedback. That is an inflammatory response, and or, particularly on the skin, is a filtration response, right? The skin is your largest organ. It's a filtration organ. So you have toxins and inflammation and other shit coming through the skin and manifesting a lot of times in, you know, the stuff on your, what is it called? Psoriasis, plaque psoriasis and those sorts of things, acne, blemishes, whatever. My skin has, especially on my back, has never looked better. I feel good. My energy's crazy. Like, there are just so many positives. Again, probably sound like like a crazy person saying all these things, but I wanted to explain very easily very easy to digest how these three pathways in these three drugs work, specifically Retatrutide, but this will ring true for semaglutide and for tirzepatide as well. It's just because Retatrutide has all three of them in it. So if you're someone, again, who's like me, who has a slow metabolism, low metabolism, whatever, and you've been struggling, I've lost 20 pounds of fat and almost double the amount of fat on the latter 3 months of this fat loss journey, right? I was just doing an experiment on myself. Almost double the amount of fat on the latter half of this journey, doing half the amount of cardio every day on the exact same calories. Yeah, leave me a comment below, hit that subscribe. See y'all again soon.